Great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who by the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and he has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Brethren, the race of faith for us to dwell with God and his family is a worthwhile endeavor, to state the obvious. In 1 Corinthians 9, verse 25, I'm reading from the Amplified Version. I like the Amplified Version. It gives you a little bit extra on every verse. Verse 25 of 1 Corinthians 9. Now, every athlete who goes into training and competes in the games is disciplined and exercises self-control in all things. They do it to win a crown that withers, but we do it to receive an imperishable crown that cannot wither. Therefore, I do not run without a definite goal. I do not flail. I think this is where the amplified piece comes in. I do not flail around like one beating the air, just shadow boxing, but like a boxer, I strictly discipline my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached the gospel to others, I myself will not somehow be disqualified as unfit for service. But brethren, in the time I have today, I'm going to review the parts of a game and how playing a game, your game, somebody else's game, God's game, preferably, I'm going to compare that to the race we run in this life. First, just a mention about the anatomy of a game. First, a game has an objective or a goal. A game has a set of rules, and a game has an end. A game is not a circle. A game just goes on forever. This physical life doesn't go on forever. God's plan for mankind is linear. It has a beginning, it has an end. And that beginning can be found in Genesis 1:1. In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. If you want to say that John 1:1 is the beginning, that's fine. In John 1:1 it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. But we can all agree that there is a beginning. So first, a quick definition. A game is a structured form of play, usually undertaken for entertainment or fun, sometimes used for an educational tool, and you can get paid for it. But then it quickly becomes a professional game, and it's maybe no longer as much fun as it was. So a game, number one, has an objective. We should ask ourselves, is this game worth playing? Is the objective worth it? If you go online to Wikipedia and look at games, there's one wiki entry that states that there are over 3,000 types of sports games that people play in this world. And that's just one classification of games. There's sports, tabletop games, video games, role-playing games, business games, simulations. It doesn't count all of the myriad video game titles that are out there, probably more than 3,000. But one caught my eye. It's combined boxing and chess. So it's called boxing chess. So one of those sports games listed. I personally classify it as play dumb games, win dumb prizes. My daughter informed me that's close to a Taylor Swift quote and a song she came up with, but I'm not quoting Taylor Swift up here. If you act in a thoughtless way and play a dumb game, you will face negative consequences, a dumb prize. You can think of this as more of a sarcastic way to say you reap what you sow, or you get what's coming to you. In the sport game boxing chess, I went way too deep on this, but here it is. The way you play it, you play a game of chess, a round of chess, move a few pieces, maybe 2 rounds. You box for 3 minutes. You go play chess for another round, you box for 3 minutes. And the loser either gets knocked out or gets checkmated. So if that's the kind of game that you want to play, you can win a dumb prize. You should ask ourselves, is that the objective goal, and is that game worthwhile? And you have to decide for yourself. There are some of you out there that think that's a worthwhile game. You know what? Maybe a time in your life that it is. I'm a little bit older. This little noggin gets hit. I'm down for the count. It's not a game I want to play. But do I win a prize? You have to ask yourself, are you going to gain a skill? Do you learn some information? Do you get entertained? Are you building some friendships, making some bonds? Are you getting paid to play the sport? How does it make you feel when you're done? Do the people you're playing with have the same objectives as you have when you're playing the game? And finally, is it worthwhile? Well, the race we run for God's kingdom is worthwhile. Our salvation is the goal. We run with a purpose. We're running together, and we all are at different points in the race, and we all share the same goal. The goal is to be part of God's family, to be in the first resurrection, to be kings and priests in God's kingdom. And it does matter who we play our games with. We turn into 1 Corinthians verse 15, verse 33. The title and the heading in my Bible says, "Bad company corrupts good character." In the NIV version, I think it says it well. In 1 Corinthians 15, verse 33, "Do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. Come back to your senses as you ought and stop sinning. For there are some who are ignorant of God. I say this to your shame." Period. And he says it to your shame because if you're aware of God, you should know better. In the first century, the Apostle Paul corrected Christians in Corinth for, quote, hanging with the wrong crowd. These Christians were spending time with people guided by wrong values and acting in wrong ways. It severely and adversely affected them. And bad examples were crowding God out of their lives, and Paul said that it was shameful. We're all sitting here in this congregation. We're all Christians. These words are written by the Apostle Paul for us. These are part of the rules that we follow when we play a game. And in the second point, a game has rules to follow. So the rules in this earthly race we run are found in the Bible. Let's turn our Bibles to Nahum. I wanted to give an entire sermonette on Nahum, but I got interrupted by this topic of playing games. But I want to tie it in the Philistines because the Ninevites, another bad people. And the rules, and let's turn about Nahum, and then these same people, you remember, the Ninevites were saved by Jonah. And Jonah is a fantastic story. We hear a lot about it, but if you recognize the Ninevites are not around anymore. There's not a nation of Assyrians. And Jonah gave his message around 781 to 750. And in Jonah 3:10, don't turn there, stay in Nahum. We're going to pick up at Nahum 3:7. But in Jonah 3:10, it says, God saw their works, that they turned from their evil way. The Ninevites turned from their evil ways. And God relented from the disaster he had said he would bring upon them, and he did not do it. So the reason why Nineveh is no longer around can be found in Nahum 3, verse 7. Because Nineveh's sorcery and wickedness, Nahum 3:7, it shall come to pass that all who look upon you will flee from you and say, Nineveh is laid waste. Who will bemoan her? Where shall I seek comforters for you? Because everybody hated Nineveh. About 120 years after Jonah, around 612, Nineveh was destroyed. The Ninevites, the Assyrians arose out of one of the world's first great empire, as one of the world's first great empires. And their expansion in Israel resulted in total destruction and exile of the northern kingdom, as you know, and its tribes. The Assyrian armies were violent, and they were destructive on a scale that the world had never seen up until that time. And they were phenomenally cruel and rich. They were at the time Nahum predicted their downfall. They were at the heart of a vast and powerful empire. And there's a section in Halley's Bible Handbook, which I found referenced on Life, Hope, and Truth, that says, it provides some information just to tell you how great this civilization, how powerful and evil this civilization was. The term Nineveh, quote, refers to a whole complex of associated villages served by one great irrigation system and protected by one network of fortification based on river defenses. And the greater Nineveh, like greater Houston, which includes Katy and the surrounding areas and the woodlands, was about 30 miles long and about 10 miles wide. And it was protected by 5 walls and 3 moats around it. built by forced labor of unnumbered thousands of foreign captives. The inner city of Nineveh proper, like downtown Houston, if you may, is about 3 miles long and about 1.5 miles wide, and it was built at the junction of the Tigris and the Kosar rivers, so it's kind of a long rectangular city. And it's protected by a wall that was 100 foot high. I'm guessing this building is 30 feet high, so 3 times as high as this. And if you're a soldier coming up against that wall, once you get over to the top of it, the width of the wall could hold 4 chariots. So I don't know what their strategy was. Maybe after the poor soldier got to the top of the wall, then he faced 4 chariots running him down. But there's another battlefield 100 foot up in the air. And that surrounded the whole city for about 8 miles. And so it's a powerful city. Very, very scary. But God brought that city to its knees. The Babylonians and Medes rose up and began a rebellion that overtook Nineveh and brought down the Assyrian Empire. And what you sow, you shall reap. And the Ninevites played by God's rules under Jonah and were spared, and didn't play by God's rules and were devastated. And finally, the third point, a game has an end. A game comes to completion. And I wasn't going to mention this, but there's been some movies that came out recently, and this whole idea, Eastern culture creeping into the West, about circles and circle of life. And God's plan is linear. It's not a circle. God's plan for mankind runs in a straight line. It has a beginning, it has an end. Like I mentioned at the outset, Genesis 1:1 and John 1:1. The circle of life may be a catchy phrase. It may be one of humanity's most popular ideas, or Satan's most popular ideas propagated on humanity. And you can see how we get there, because nature has circles all around us. There's day and night, the turning of the seasons, the revolutions of the planets. You can think it's kind of obvious when you start to think of, well, birth and growth, maturity, decay, death, and then rebirth. And growth, maturity, decay, death, and rebirth. And the cycle just goes on and in a circle. And so the implications of that is death is really not an end. Death is not a tragedy. Death is only an invitation for birth and renewal. And so this is the myth of eternal return. Look, I think the phoenix is really cool, but then when you start looking into it, the phoenix rising from the ashes and then becoming ashes and then rising from the ashes is similar to this circle idea. And the wheel of time, or the wheel of history, also known as the Kala Chakra, is a concept found in several religious traditions and philosophies, notably religious traditions of Indian origin in India, as Hinduism, Jainism, Sikhism, Buddhism, and they regard time as cyclical and consisting of repeating ages. Many other cultures contain belief in a similar concept, notably the Quiro natives, Indians of Peru, and the Hopi Indian natives in Arizona. So, in the circle of life, individual is extinguished, and there's nothing new under the sun. There's nothing new that I or another individual can bring to the world. Anything I dream has already been done. Anything I do will only be washed away by time, by some other fool that comes after me that repeats the exact same problems and things that I did. Ultimately, the circle of life is a philosophy of defeat and passivity, and it's fated to repeat and go over and again. And so then why dream? Why try? Why bother? Hakuna Matata. Don't worry. Be happy. And this cute little lion that we hold up, that the Lion King, if you've seen the movie, it was a catchy song, and then I started listening to the song more and more, and I was like, wait a minute, they're talking about the circle of life, and they're holding up this rebirth of the king, and the symbolism was kind of overwhelming. It's certainly catchy, but it doesn't have an end. That circle, so to speak, is not a game that I want to play. There's a straight line from the beginning of this world to the end of this world, and on that straight line, you and I live our lives. Our life has a beginning, and our life has an end, and God's plan has a beginning, and God's plan has an end. The end of God's plan in our life is found in Revelation 21, verse 6. You don't have to turn there. The end of God's plan, it says in Revelation 21, verse 6, "And he said to me, 'It is done!' Exclamation point. I am the Omega, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give the fountain of the water of life freely to him who thirsts. He who overcomes shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son." So here's a quick list of some things to do when we stop playing somebody else's game. Talking with God in prayer, and you kids that are playing video games out there, just write all this stuff down, like as quick as you can, because I'm going to go through it fast. So when you stop playing your video games, talk to God in prayer. Let God talk to us through the study of his Bible. Parents, we should teach our children important lessons and skills for life. Serve those in needs, including widows and orphans. Read educational and inspiring books, such as biographies and histories. Further your education or sharpen your job skills that you can help us advance so they can help you advance your careers in order so you can provide for your family and for yourself as you get older. Learning to appreciate good music and learning to play an instrument. Have a serious conversation with your friends about weighty and worthwhile topics. Learn a new language. Enjoy God's creation by gardening, hiking, cycling, skiing, kayaking, stargazing, playing sports, and so forth. There's a quick list when you stop playing video games. So we all ultimately get to choose the games we play. So don't play other people's games. Play your games. Play God's game. Run the race God has set before us. We should ensure that we know the goal. We should ensure that we know the rules, and we can be confident that there is an end to the game. And then we truly can not worry and be happy.